Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Why Your Frontline Isn't Using Your LMS and How to Fix It, sponsored by our good partner, Exonify. I'm Claude Werder of Brandon Hall Group. I'll be your moderator and host. Our featured presenter today is J.D. Dillon, Chief Learning Architect for Exonify. J.D.'s become an expert on frontline training and enablement over 2 decades, working in operations and talent development with dynamic organizations, including Disney, Kaplan, and AMC. And he'll introduce himself a little bit more later, but you're in really good hands with JD. He's going to give us great insights on how to really engage frontline learners. I want to take a couple of minutes to thank Exonify for sponsoring our event today. Exonify is the frontline forward learning and enablement platform used by companies like Walmart, Kroger, and Foot Locker. Over 3.7 million users in more than 160 countries use Exonify to onboard and train in 5 minutes a day, no break room internet required. With bite-sized gamified microlearning, custom training content, embedded communication, and more, Exonify is revolutionizing the way frontline workers learn, connect, and get things done. For those of you who aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we're a human capital management research and advisory firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. We have 6 practice areas, including learning and development, talent management, and leadership development. Quick mention that we currently have several certification programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. Visit certification.brandonhall.com to learn more about how to earn that designation. Your participation in our research studies is one of the most crucial components of Brandon Hall Group's insights and thought leadership. So if you have a few minutes and see any topics that you can take a survey for, it's greatly appreciated. We have surveys open now for DEI, talent management, and leadership development. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always just visit brandonhall.com. And finally, a few logistics. To ask questions, please use the questions panel on your control bar. We'll be stopping for questions occasionally, so just feel free to ask questions whenever one comes to mind. We'll also leave some time at the end for questions. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll share a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. The chat is also open for today, and we really hope you'll share your thoughts and experiences as we go along in the webinar today. Your feedback and perspective on what we present and on your own experiences will make the webinar more valuable for everyone. So please join in on the discussion, share your thoughts as we go through, or just pop in, say hello, and let us know where you're coming from today. Let's go ahead and get started. But first, just a reminder, we'll have a quick raffle at the end of the webinar today. The winner will receive a $100 Amazon gift card. But you do have to be present to win, so make sure you stay till the end. So to get started now, our webinar title states that frontline workers are not using your LMS, and the reasons are pretty straightforward. The type of LMS most employers use is not designed for the specific needs of the frontline workers, as JD will get in great detail later on. While frontline workers comprise 70 to 80% of the workforce, depending on the data you use, the traditional LMS is designed mostly for desk-bound office workers. Focus has been on higher-paying jobs or the individual contributors and leaders who are seen as having the potential to develop skills that can drive business growth. These have traditionally been the employees that companies prioritize for their investment in learning and their investment in learning technology. That's beginning to change. Our research shows most employers realize now that they must focus far more on the training of the frontline workers, the people who build the products, provide the services, and work directly with customers. But a lot of organizations now, they don't have the optimal tools to do it. In other words, our research shows that many learning organizations are just not in a great position to serve the front lines. But that's what our research shows. We want to kind of get a sense of where you are in terms of usage of technology for frontline workers. So I have a quick poll question that we'll put up here. And the question is, how many of your frontline employees are logging into your current LMS at least once a month? Is it less than 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, 76% to 100%, or you don't know or unsure? If you really have no idea, you can put don't know, unsure, but if you have a good idea of the range, it would be great if you include that. We're really interested in where you are in your journey and what type of participation you're getting from Frontline learning. Shay, our producer today, will let us know when got a good group of answers, and we'll see what you all say. And then we'll move on here. So let's see. About 37% of the more than a third aren't sure. Among the rest, the largest percentage is less than 25%. Overall, 40% say that less than half their workers are logging in at least once a month. 26% say it's less than a quarter of the population. All right, so that's more or less what we expected and what we've seen in the past. And so the question is, why has this occurred, and then what are the solutions? So let's get into the history a little bit. Here's a slide that talks a little bit about the legacy of traditional learning technology, and it's really around these 7 pillars. It's really the learning technology is focused, especially early on, and still to some degree, around structured programs, learning organized into formal programs with predefined curricula, learning objectives, and assessments. The reason for this was an ensured a standardized approach to learning and development. It was more easily scalable, especially with the technology in the 2000s and beginning of the 2010s. Learning was very much event-based, designed to deliver training in specific sessions, such as workshops or seminars, or in online courses with a fixed start and end date. The approach required learners to allocate dedicated time for learning and usually leave their job, which of course is very difficult for frontline workers. It was often instructor-led or self-paced, allowing learners to progress through content at their own speed for the self-paced learners, or to participate in organized sessions. And ILT has been, as most of you know, has been really at the heart of learning for a long time. Not until the pandemic hit in 2020 was there a significant shift to even virtual ILT. Much of the content is knowledge-based. The focus was primarily on imparting theoretical knowledge and concepts. And with all the focus on skills training now, that's just not good enough. There's too much learning that's often with limited emphasis on practical application or skill development. Many corporate training programs aim to ensure compliance, still do, with regulations or industry standards, leading to certifications upon completion. So there's limited personalization historically. Traditional learning technology often lacked personalization features, delivering the same content to all learners regardless of their individual needs or styles or where they're working in the organization. And then, of course, limited integration with workflow, which is really the key of it for frontline workers. Learning was often disconnected from the daily workflow. It's event-based. It pulls people away from their jobs in order to gain access to training. So what this has led to is a very low satisfaction rate with technology. So this technology is designed for office workers primarily. And even among those users, when we asked organizations about how satisfied they were with their technology, and this is early this year, only 17% of organizations we surveyed rated their learning technology in terms of satisfaction at 7 or higher on a 10-point scale. So that's what the people where the technology is designed for them. Imagine the satisfaction of people who would struggle to use technology in their roles. There's also traditionally been a lot of confusion about the technology landscape. 61% of organizations in our research said that they find the technology market confusing or even extremely confusing. And a lot of that is because so much focus on functionality and capability from vendors instead of focusing on what learners need and want. But things are changing. In recent years, the technology evolution has been really rapid. Far more focus on personalized learning, delivered just in time, any place, anywhere, experiences through AI and virtual and augmented reality, microlearning, gamification, mobile first, all of the things on the slide. There's been huge progress made. There's been more focus on collaboration, interactivity, making learning more engaging, allowing people in remote locations to work together with each other. But two big problems remain. The technology is still mainly designed for desk-bound office workers rather than frontline workers. And many learning organizations struggle to change their mindsets away from that knowledge-based learning, that event-based learning, to practical, experiential learning, where employees actually learn by doing and work together. Quick story, I went to a learning conference in Canada last month, and I was a speaker, and I also did interviews with learning professionals. And the whole focus of the conference was modernizing learning, making learning more personalized, anytime, anywhere, AI-driven, all that kind of stuff. But it was really striking that when learning professionals talked about the learning and the work they were doing to quote unquote modernize learning, almost everyone still talked in terms of courses or blended learning that still incorporated a good amount of live or virtual LT. So they were there to really get out of that mindset, but they were still very much stuck in it. So even as the technology evolves, the traditional corporate learning mindset is lagging a little bit. For example, our 2024 research shows that less than half of organizations consistently use microlearning, which is really helpful to deliver learning at the moment of need. AR and VR simulations are used still by less than 15% of organizations. Collaborative and social learning technologies are actually the most in-demand technologies for new technologies, but even at that, only 40%, really less than 40% are actively looking to add that functionality. Even in our Excellence Awards program, which is the biggest awards program in the world, we recognize innovation in learning. Many entries are still built around some sort of course-based or event-based learning. And meanwhile, there continues to be very little focus on the learning needs of the frontline workers who comprise the majority of the workforce and either are responsible for making the products customers buy, or in industries such as hospitality and retail are the first people customers encounter and identify with the brand. So that's the history behind the challenge in training frontline workers. And I will now hand it over to JD to talk about the solutions. JD?
Thanks, Claude. Hi, everybody. Thanks again so much for joining us today. As introduced, I'm JD, the Chief Learning Architect at Axonify, and I've spent my entire career supporting frontline workers. So I started out managing movie theaters and theme parks before I got into learning and development formally during my 10 years at the Walt Disney Company. So before I dive into slides and content and story, I'm curious, how many of you have worked in frontline roles? Maybe you started on the front line earlier in your career. Maybe you've had different stops along the way. So in the chat, let me know. What kind of frontline jobs have you had before you got into learning and development and human resources? And I'll start sharing my slides from there. Curious to see.
Oh, got district sales manager, variety of different things there.
Awesome. I think
business office, retail, all sorts of things.
Great. Thanks for sharing, everybody. And I think it's especially important to kind of reflect on those experiences as we dive into our conversation today. And we think about how we contextualize what we do for frontline workforce and how we can do things differently and how technology enables that story. So today I take everything that I've learned over the past 25 years of frontline work in partnering with my team at Exonify to build technology specifically around the needs of the frontline workforce. So we support about 4 million frontline workers in over 160 countries, speaking 60 plus languages in industries like many that Claude mentioned around retail, grocery, distribution, hotels, food service, and more. And what I think is particularly interesting and meaningful about the feedback and the results that we see as Exonify is that it really validates the point we're making today, is that when you design an experience for the frontline workforce, you can really help this critical part of the workforce do their best and make learning and development a meaningful business priority. So as Claude was saying, frontline work is fundamentally different from what you and I do every day. We talked about the sheer scale of the frontline workforce, 70 to 80% of the workforce, in addition to the largest chunk of your organization's employee bases, if you're in a frontline forward organization. So I always like to point out the fact that while there are less people on the corporate team, those people tend to do more types of jobs. So if you just take me as an example, I'm the only person at my company who does my job. And then meanwhile, on the front line, there are hundreds to thousands of people doing very similar, if not the same type of work. And it's that commonality that really defines what I call the frontline persona, a set of attributes that we need to keep in mind as we design frontline learning and support experiences. And while, a contact center is meaningfully different than a manufacturing plant, which is meaningfully different than a grocery store, it's these attributes that hold pretty consistent across roles and industries that we need to consider before we start talking about technology or content design as L&D. And that story begins with thinking about the fact that frontline workers are distributed, across locations, geographies, sometimes countries. If you take a company like O'Reilly Auto Parts as an example, they have 6,000 locations in 2 countries, but then Foot Locker has 2,500 stores across 40 different countries. And it's this distributed work model alone that makes it that much harder to reach people with timely, reliable, consistent training and support. And then we got to consider that frontline workers are mobile. Even if they're in a store, they're not sitting in one place. They're not sitting behind a desk. And then you have a lot of workers who are in trucks doing their jobs or on airplanes in the middle of the ocean on a cruise ship. So the natural mobility of frontline work. Often people are using limited technology to do their jobs, which again makes them harder to reach. People may have two-way radios. They may have handheld scanners. They may have point of sale computers, but people typically don't have a company issued laptop or a mobile phone with them all the time while they're doing their jobs. And then people also just have limited time in these roles, which may be the biggest consideration. This work is heavily managed. When I worked in contact centers, we literally managed people to the minute throughout their shift. And at the same time, people don't have autonomy to step away from their assigned tasks to go complete some training or focus on their professional development. And at the same time, most frontline workers are restricted in when they can complete work activities. So they might have to limit access to those types of opportunities while people are on shift or while they're on the clock to make sure they're being paid for their work. And then finally, with the scale of this workforce comes diversity. And I mean diversity of experience, diversity of language preference, diversity of motivation, of purpose, and of support needs. So the question becomes, how well in our organizations do we understand these personas and these attributes within our frontline workforce? And how much do we appreciate these attributes when we're designing our frontline learning and support strategy? Because when we don't take these factors in mind, ultimately, we leave people to figure things out on their own. And that includes managers, who are a critical part of our story. Yes, managers have a bit more autonomy, but they share a lot of the attributes we're talking about today. And when we think about how we enable managers as part of the frontline team. And when we don't design learning and support to fit the frontline, we end up focused in 2 particular moments in time. A lot of frontline training takes place in onboarding, and it takes place during compliance season, because this is when we have people's attention. And we try to cram as much information into those limited moments that we have, and then rely on managers and peers to close the gap along the way. And ultimately, I see that as gambling with the frontline employee experience and put even more pressure on managers. And our research shows that half of frontline managers are burned out every day because of how much they have going on. And ultimately, all this adds up to a situation where 1/3 of frontline workers don't have access to adequate training. And half of frontline managers say that lack of training is impacting their ability to do their jobs. So hopefully you're here today, or you're watching this recording, because you believe frontline workers deserve an equitable opportunity to do their best, just like everyone else in our organizations. And I don't know about you, but I get extremely frustrated when I hear people say things like, well, these are just introductory jobs. Or, that's something that high school or college kids are supposed to do. And if that's your opinion of frontline work, then in my opinion, you've never been to a grocery store, because all you need to do to understand the real diversity of the frontline workforce is just look around the supermarket. Because yes, maybe your cashier is a high school student trying to make some extra money before they go to college, but the person behind the deli counters worked here for 20 years, and the person in the meat department's a professional butcher. They're collectively responsible for the type of experience you get when you visit the store, or you visit a restaurant, or you're on the phone with your cable company trying to figure out why your bill costs that much. And, ultimately, it doesn't matter why people do these jobs. Everyone deserves a chance to do their best. And that's up to us as their learning and development partners to get them the help that they need so they can feel capable and confident on the job. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of our time talking about. How do we make that happen? And specifically, the role that technology plays within a modern frontline enablement experience. So what I want to do is I'm going to break down the 5 biggest challenges that I commonly see across my time in frontline learning organizations run into as they try to implement support strategies for this part of the workforce. So first, we're going to highlight the challenge and how it short circuits our ability to make sure frontline employees get the help they need. Then I'll explain, where does technology fit? What kind of right fit digital capabilities do we need to be able to overcome that challenge to get people the support that they need? And then I'll give you an example from an organization in real life that has overcome this challenge and been able to achieve great results. So hopefully that plan sounds good. Let me know in the chat. Are you ready? Are you with me? Are you still there? How's lunch, if you're having lunch at this particular time? Because I actually want to cover one more thing before we continue. Stopping the slides. This is the slow jams moment of the presentation, because I want to kind of comment on something. If you don't know this already, I'm a technology vendor. Pause for stunned surprise. So my team at Axonify builds tools that do a lot of the things I'm about to talk about. But I also know how annoying it is when vendors claim that the 5 most important things that you need are the 5 things that they happen to sell. So I want to kind of give pause and say that this story isn't about my technology. It's not actually about technology as a focus. This is really just about how we apply our tools differently in support of this underserved part of the workforce. So I happen to work in technology. My real goal is to share ideas, tips, and tricks that I've come up with along the way that inform how we build technology that you can use to improve your frontline strategies. And ultimately, the organizations I'll mention today, the organizations that I work with, they're successful in enabling the frontline teams because they put in the work and the focus. Technology doesn't do the job for you. It does help you overcome a lot of the common obstacles that exist between us and the frontline workforce. So today, we're not going to demo any specific technology. What I want to do is give you the information you need to build a great checklist, a checklist of essential capabilities, because this is what technology should be able to do and can do to support a frontline team. And then what I challenge you to do after today is take the checklist. There's literal checklists in the slide deck coming up. Take that to your L&D team, or take that to your technology partners, and use that checklist to improve your own digital experience so you can better support your frontline's needs. So that's what we're doing today. Hopefully that sounds good to everybody. Again, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for everything you do. Slides back on, and let's get started. As I go, feel free to drop questions in the chat. I will pause along the way to clarify, and we'll also have some time at the end for anything that we don't catch up with as we go. So here we go. Challenge number 1. Ultimately, you can't deliver the right training to your frontline team unless you can actually reach your frontline team. And that means your entire workforce. So no matter where or when people are working. So let's take our example, in this case, a distribution center. So if anyone here works in supply chain, you work in retail, you know that people in a DC, they're running shifts 24/7. They're using heavy equipment to pick and ship products. They work in a huge facility, probably doesn't have the greatest Wi-Fi network. Maybe they've got a dedicated training room. It's got a few computers. Maybe there's a kiosk in the break room where people pull up their schedule and their pay stubs. And the team, they probably have location trainers, but those folks tend to spend a lot of time in onboarding with new hires. And then your management team, they're busy with a variety of operational tasks. They're focused on safety and efficiency a little bit more than they are learning and development programs. So how do we use technology to reach frontline employees in an environment like a distribution center so people have access to the right training and support at the right times? So let's look at a short list of technology capabilities that can help you solve this problem of just reaching people for the first part. So first, I believe organizations and more organizations are shifting from a BYOD stance. So it's less about bring your own device. It's more about a CYOD, a choose your own device strategy when it comes to the hardware side of digital learning, because we have to care just as much about the device access as we do about the software that we're using. And the reality is frontline operations leverage a wide variety of devices that have different size screens and different capabilities. So in your operation, you may have some desktop computers, you may have Zebra handheld devices, you may have tablets, you may have personal smartphones, and that's your access point on the front line. So that means you can't design for one access point without automatically limiting some people's opportunities. Instead, our technology has to help us be responsive to different types of devices and screen sizes so that no matter what device you're plugging into, you have access to the same training and support opportunity. So one, thinking about CYOD strategy. Two is another capability called adaptive streaming, which is essential to the frontline workplace because, like I said, your DC may not have the greatest network connectivity. And with a mobile workforce, we can't rely on people being anchored to PCs that are plugged into the wall or Wi-Fi networks that are particularly strong. So we have to consider the delivery driver that's got varying signal strength, retail associates who work in stores where the bandwidth is kind of eaten up by the point of sale. And adaptive streaming allows us to adjust content quality to fit the bandwidth available to that person. And it also takes care of a challenge I see a lot, which is frontline employees will log into a desktop computer in a back room somewhere, and then the training just buffers. And it takes minutes on minutes to load. When's the last time you tried to watch a video on a streaming platform and it took minutes to load and you didn't just walk away? Exactly. That's what happens in a lot of online training. So adaptive streaming helps us overcome that concern and also overcome concerns around things like data usage. So maybe you're considering allowing people to use their personal devices, but you don't want people to have a bill for data that gets kind of racked up because they're accessing training on their own phones. Well, adaptive streaming, again, adapts the experience and adapts the content quality to make sure there are no surprises and that people can get what they need where they are with that device. Another huge adjustment we've seen in technology, especially the last 4 years, is the use of QR codes. Remember 4 years ago when no one really knew how to use a QR code? Now it's just like every day you scan something. They're a great way of helping overcome that access challenge when it comes to frontline access to learning technology, instead of requiring people to navigate complex enterprise systems like the intranet or your HR platform. Because the reality is, if people have to log into an HR platform and then click multiple times to find your learning platform, they're just never going to get there. So we've seen some learning and development frontline teams place posters in the break room with a QR code link that goes straight to the learning management system so people can get there right away to get access to information. And then some folks are placing QR codes in specific places in the workplace, maybe even attached to specific equipment, so people can access the related information on the job to get help, get answers, and maybe take training in the moment of need in the workflow, as Claude was talking about earlier. And then the last one for this challenge is along the same lines. There's the availability of technology in one click from where people do their jobs. So like I said, if your LMS is hiding deep within another platform, it's unlikely that people are going to find it. So how can you embed links to your learning platform in operational tools people use every day? So for example, when I was in L&D in a contact center, I placed one-click links to our learning platform in every enterprise application. So the CRM had a click in the menu. The knowledge base had a drop-down menu where I put an access point. SharePoint had a link on it where people could access. So anywhere people are doing their jobs, can they in one click access your learning platform without having to dig underneath a pile of technology? And as I mentioned before, I've been in frontline tech for 8 years. And I have this kind of affliction now where I can't go into public without looking for screens. So if I'm in a hotel lobby, I know exactly how many screens there are. Or if I'm in a restaurant, I know exactly where the server stations are because I just keep looking for access points. And I think that's what we have to do as L&D is, one, understand our company device policies. So two, understand what hardware is used on the front line and where there are what I call screens of opportunity. So we know what our options are for reaching a very hard to reach audience. And as a quick example, one of the first companies I ever worked with as part of the Exonify team is a large retailer with a large distribution operation. And when we first got started, we went looking for the screens of opportunity, right? Because we're a learning platform. Where are people going to access the learning platform? And we found that there were a few training PCs in a room away from the operation in the distribution center. But very few employees ever managed to find their way to that room, even if there was required training to do. So we went looking for a new option. And when we looked at the workflow, especially for lift truck drivers, which was most of the people that we were working with, we found that there were natural stopping points in the workflow, specifically 10-minute periods where people had to charge their lift truck before they could go back to work. So all we did was we moved those PCs from the training room to where the charging stations were. And now it was learning and development was available in the flow of work without mobile devices or handhelds or those types of things. And what's really cool about this organization, 7 years later, 95% of their 100,000 supply chain team members complete on average 2 training sessions per week. So before we start thinking about content design and skill requirements, we need to start at the beginning and really think about, well, how are we going to reach people? And sometimes that means thinking about complex integrations between platforms. And sometimes it's as simple as moving an old PC to a better spot within your environment, your operation. So that's challenge number 1. How do we reach people through technology? And I'll pause there. Claude, I'll see if there are any questions that we can address before we move to our next challenge.
Yeah, I have a quick question here that came in, and feel free just to keep asking questions as we go. This question is, what are the pros and cons of learning tech that's part of a larger tool set like task management or scheduling apps, as opposed to its own specialty platform?
If I had a nickel for every frontline organization I've seen that is building some type of kind of home-based employee application, I would have many nickels. So I believe that's the future of learning technology, is how do we move our unique capabilities closer and closer to the tools that people use every day to do the job. And you see that with corporate teams, especially around like Microsoft Teams and these other types of integrations. But I think the story changes with frontline employees because the tools and the apps they use every day are different. So as you mentioned, it could be the scheduling platform. It could be a task management platform. It could be an inventory management tool. So I believe we're moving from a place where it's just about putting a link to a different platform in another place to a world where we're going to more meaningfully integrate those experiences, and AI is going to help us do a lot of those things. So I think the key is making sure that we don't sacrifice capability for the experience. So make sure that, yes, your organization may not want to pay for 10 specialty tools, but it's unlikely you're going to find one tool that can do everything. So how do we make sure we're using the right tools that provide the right value, but simplify the experience as much as possible for the end employee who, again, doesn't have time to mine through a pile of technology to find information they need? So, great question. Thanks, everybody. Let's jump into challenge number 2. So now that we know what our options are for using technology to reach the front line, so where are the screens, where are the devices, how can software help us leverage those devices? Just because there's a screen and there's a device doesn't mean people are actually going to log in and use them for learning purposes. Because remember, frontline employees have limited time for extra stuff on the job, and usually L&D falls under the category of extra stuff. So if we want people who are already overloaded to engage, we need to make the experience as easy or as simple as possible. Simple is a better word, because learning shouldn't be easy, right? It needs to be meaningfully challenging, but it shouldn't be hard to just get to the activity or complete the experience. You should be focusing your energy in the right places. So let's think about, how do we make it simpler? Here's a quick test for you. Do you have your phone with you? So if you have your phone, I would like you to play a video on YouTube right now, any video. I'm assuming you're very quick at this. The question I want to ask you is, how many clicks did it take to play a video on YouTube on your phone? 2? Maybe 3? That's the bar for simplicity of digital content experience. That's what people are used to. Let's not even talk about other social media platforms. So once when I was working in L&D, I counted how many clicks it took my frontline team to play a video in the LMS. If you'd like to guess how many clicks it took, feel free, because the answer is 7. People never made it past click number 3 or 4. And I knew where to find the content. It took me 7 clicks. So 7 clicks doesn't work. For example, in the grocery store, where managers only schedule the people they need based on expected sales for that day. And once people clock in or out, they head to their departments. And they might be in the front end, they might be in the deli, they might be in produce, and that's where the people are going to spend their shifts. They might visit the break room. I don't know if everyone here who isn't in grocery knows, a lot of grocery stores have a second floor you never see because customers can't go up there. But employees almost never make it there either because they spend most of their time closer to home base during their shift. So once we make sure our tools are within reach, we need to make sure the experience is simple enough so that people can fit it into their workflow and make ultimately learning a habit that they do every day, just like people clock in, they complete a checklist, they attend the pre-shift huddle. That's what learning should feel like for a frontline employee, for us to have the maximum impact on their ability to do the job. So how do we make frontline learning more simple through technology? It begins with accessibility. So making sure that we're applying standards like WCAG, like 508 in the right environments, not just because it's required, because it's the right thing to do to make sure everyone has a chance to access information through our technology. But I extend the accessibility conversation further to things like language preference, or maybe even reading capability, because too many people on the front line spend time and effort just trying to understand information, yet alone actually trying to learn it. And technology is now in a place where we can overcome these hurdles. And this is becoming even more and more commonplace thanks to AI capabilities like automated translation and automated captioning that is now readily available that we should be applying so people can focus on learning and not just focus on understanding. Single sign-on is probably the most common requirement I see in learning platforms when people are looking for something to launch to their teams. But I believe we can take ease of access even a step further with what I call common credentials. So frontline workers should be able to access their learning tools just like they access whatever other work system they use. So in some cases, that could be SSO, that could be a common username and password, or it could be by swiping their ID card, right? Depending on your company's IT setup and how people access tools throughout the day, it should match the experience they have. So it's not, I swipe to access the point of sale, but then I have to remember this other password in order to get to my other platform. And then I'm going to have to ask my manager how to log in, and they're already too busy to help me do that. Another one that's common on the front line is schedule awareness, because most frontline workers are hourly. So this means they can't do work when they're not at work. And that includes training while off the clock. And the natural inclination for a lot of teams is just to lock people out, right? If you're clocked in or you're on shift, you're scheduled, you can access the LMS. If you're not, you can't. I find that limits the potential value of your tools because it means you can't use your technology to provide access to other types of information people may need when they're away from the job. This is something we saw that was critically important in the early days of the pandemic when a lot of frontline employees were furloughed, but the organization still needed a direct connection to people. And a lot of teams used their learning platforms to send timely messages out to people to keep them updated. So that's why frontline learning platforms are increasingly schedule aware, meaning that the platform knows when someone is and isn't clocked in, and it adjusts the experience accordingly. So instead of just a pure lockout, we can turn on and off certain features. So people can't maybe do training activities when they're not at work, but they still might be able to access your HR information or messaging so that their manager can reach out to them. And I find it helps balance utility and the risk associated to the nature of hourly work. We've already talked about the idea that, YouTube or TikTok or Instagram are the bar for digital experience. So the question becomes, how do you make your technology look and feel more consumer-like? Because you almost never access digital content through an experience that looks like an LMS in your everyday life, right? So I always urge people to look for consumer-grade or consumer-familiar experiences that don't require an instruction manual to use, because again, people don't have time for that. And while I'm not specifically talking about Axonify technology today, there is one thing I do want to highlight because it might be my favorite feature of Axonify. It's just called the start button. So when someone logs into Axonify, all they have to do is press the start button, and the platform then delivers the right experience for that person on that day. And that's because we've opted for a more directed experience design, because we know frontline employees who have maybe minutes available for extra activities, they don't have time to go hunting through a curricula or go looking for courses. And of course, people can browse a content catalog and receive recommendations and those types of things, but that's after the directed experience. And we chose to kind of rebalance the push and pull of digital training specifically because of how frontline employees spend their time. And we know if we've got 5 minutes, we need to maximize those 5 minutes. So that's why we designed a directed experience that I believe is a better fit than the browse or kind of Netflix experience you see in a lot of learning platforms. So overall, by applying simplification principles, you can stop worrying about the simple stuff, just getting people logged in or explaining how you find information in the platform. And instead, we can spend our time focused on the harder stuff, which is motivation and personalization, designing the right content to support the right skills. And we're heading in that direction in just a minute. But the example for this idea of simplification comes to life in one longstanding partnership that my team has in the grocery space. So we work with a large US grocer, about 45,000 frontline workers across 7 different states. For the past 10 years, we've seen a sustained engagement of 97% of frontline workers completing training at least once a month, usually more like 2 to 3 times per month. And it really shows how commitment to making the experience easy drives engagement over a long period of time. So it's not just about gimmicks to pull people in on the short term, especially as people turn over on the front line. And even more interesting is seeing that when you make training simple and something people can access every day, you can actually reduce the overall amount of time you spend in training because you're focused on training for the right reasons at the right time instead of training for the sake of training where everyone completes information that they don't ultimately need. And when I was talking to one of their team members, they kind of nailed the point when they said, when it comes to training, it's got to be simple so it becomes part of someone's daily routine. Because frontline employees, they don't go to work to learn, they go to work to do the job, and that's how the work is managed. So if learning needs to fit into the job and not take away from it, we need to make sure the experience is as simple as possible. And often that means leaving the challenge to the actual learning experience and not the accessing the part of the experience. So that's our second challenge. Claude, I'll throw it to you. Any questions come up as we were going?
Yeah, here's one. Not sure it's the right place, but do you see more L&D teams relying on automated translation as opposed to translation services?
Yes, I think the days of translation services are numbered. That said, you still always want someone who understands the language to review information, especially if it's formal training content before it's deployed, because there may be nuance that automation still can't quite get right. But what we're seeing in terms of AI-enabled translation of content, we're already at a place where for a large percentage of languages, it's perfectly good for what I would call informal exchanges. So things like social feeds, right? Messaging back and forth with people where you don't need it to be picture perfect on SOP type of information. When it comes to legally approved compliance content, I believe automated translation is going to accelerate our ability to make information available to more people. I do think you still need a person in the workflow to make sure the information is accurate, but instead of having a highly paid professional translator, a lot more organizations I work with are using people in the workforce who know how to read different languages, and they're validating before they deploy while the machine is taking care of the heavy lifting. So, great question. Thanks, everybody. Let's jump forward. We're starting to run short on time. So let's talk about going beyond access. So far, we talked about just getting people into a learning system. Now let's talk about what we do when we have people's attention, because in my perspective, every login matters. So every visit to your learning platform is an opportunity to demonstrate value. And every negative experience that people have, whether the content won't load, the content's irrelevant to my job, it's more likely people won't come back because they don't trust that we're really taking care of their time, given how little time they have. And I know it's particularly challenging in frontline spaces where a lot of our focus is compliance and regulation and job requirements. And then there's the state of California where you need to do that training because they said so. And I believe we're never going to get to a place where it's 100% of logins equal 100% value add. But I think we can do our best now to make sure that those less valuable check the box experiences are what I would say are the kind of understandable exception rather than an unforgivable rule. And as an example, think about your local hardware store. How many products are sold in a big box hardware store? If you're guessing in your head right now, the correct answer is about 50,000 different SKUs, at least, are available on the shelves of your local hardware store. That's an impossible number for a frontline associate to understand, especially if they're newer on the job. So the question becomes, well, how do we help an associate in this environment feel capable and confident on the job so they can meet the customer's needs no matter how complex the topics they're dealing with may be. And for me, it begins before we get to the technology. It's how do we know we're focused on the right topics and spending our limited resources in the right places? So we're right now preparing our 2024 Deskless Research Report, where we look at the current state of frontline work and how we can help people have a great day on the job every day. And as part of that, we've asked employees, well, what's the most important training that you feel you need help with? And then we asked corporate team members, what training do you think frontline employees need? What you see on screen is the frontline employees' answers of the training that they're looking for to do their jobs better. That is not the same list as when we compare to what the corporate team members said. So the question for you becomes, how often do you ask your frontline teams, or do you have mechanisms that you ask, not just your subject matter experts, not just management, employees, what do you need? What could I provide? What topics should we be focusing on so you can do your job better every day? And then once we know those answers, then it comes down to, well, how can we leverage technology to get that experience to people? So a couple key capabilities. One starts with personalization. Even at the scale of frontline workforce, we can now meaningfully personalize every login to get people what they need when they need it. Because historically, we've been doing a lot of one-size-fits-all training, given just the sheer number of people we're trying to help. But now technology is helping us go beyond. So it's the right training at the right time in someone's preferred language, maybe in someone's preferred reading level, and going beyond, like I said, the Netflix style of shopping for content and presenting people the right content. But we could take it a step further now if anyone's experienced or worked with adaptive learning technology. Because there's no reason why someone with 30 years of retail experience should be completing the same training program as someone who just started their first job. Or maybe someone who really gets the information moving quickly. Why should we slow them down and demotivate them and frustrate them when other members of the new hire class are maybe struggling to get the basics right? So adaptive learning technology allows us to take what we know about people and shift the experience so that each minute matters and is focused on the right type of thing. Another consideration is frequency of use, how often people access a learning platform. Because like I said, we focus a lot on frontline training during onboarding and compliance, but otherwise the LMS really isn't part of the workflow, right? It's over there and the job is done over here. So corporate team members have plenty of digital options to find information, but the frontline team often relies on asking the person next to them or asking their manager. So I think adding value to your learning platform includes adding use cases, and that includes performance support. So it could be as simple as making sure that you have readily available job aids or information in a digital library that brings people back to the learning experience, because the more often you have people finding value in your platform, the more likely you are to click the other button, right? To try out the other content in addition to the answers they're getting on the job. And we're going to another place with this idea of performance support on the front line right now with digital assistants and AI. So today, it's interesting. There's an untold amount of insight locked in your learning management system. And Gen AI is going to help us unlock those insights so we can make them available to support performance on the fly. So that instead of employees having to ask, the person next to them and hope they know, give people a more knowledgeable and reliable friend or peer that they can work with that's available through their learning technology. So I believe it's the strategic combination of having the right content focused on the right topics, and then technology that can personalize the experience using that content that helps us get the right support to the right people. So when I mentioned that hardware experience, I work with an organization in the hardware space, about 1,700 stores, 280,000 associates. The organization's using a lot of the techniques we talked about today to drive training engagement. So they have people coming back to the platform multiple times per week. And when you think about the number of part-time workers they likely have, it's almost every shift that people are now using a learning platform as part of their workflow. But the really cool part of this is a story that one of their L&D leaders told me about a customer who visited the store, and they were looking for electrical push connectors. I have no idea what that means. I don't know if anyone here is a do-it-yourself type person, but that's the question they asked the associate when they walked in the store. Help me find electrical push connectors. The associate had no idea what was going on. But instead of saying, I don't know, or that's not my department, which it wasn't, she actually pulled out her learning platform on the mobile device that she used on the job, logged into the LMS, and then found the training video on that topic and shared it with the customer right there. And not only did the customer find what they needed, they also filled out the comment card at the end of, on the receipt. They gave them a 10 out of 10 on the survey, but they also left a comment that said, quote, "Your associate didn't know, but she said we can do this together. We learned together by watching these videos. How cool was that?" So it's just a great example of how we can take frontline tech to another place beyond structured delivery of training to help eliminate the concept of I don't know, even in a highly complex workplace. So we got about 10 minutes left to go, 2 challenges left to hit. Claude, what questions did we get on that one?
Real quick, you mentioned the new types of technology. Are you running into any challenges with generative AI applications that hallucinate or make up information that may confuse frontline workers?
It's a critical consideration for how you design a Gen AI application, specifically around kind of digital assistant question and answer type of performance support. So when it comes to talking to your learning tech vendors, really ask, how is the vendor limiting the knowledge base to just approved information and not allowing the technology to go out into the world or train on information? And it's more about retrieval of information and using Gen AI to understand questions and shape responses, but not necessarily find the information. So it's using a combination of search technology and Gen AI to simplify the experience of getting help, but while limiting the information to just what you approved people to be able to use. So it is a known problem, but something we're overcoming in ways that I think is going to be harder to overcome in the real world, where you have applications searching the internet and trying to make sense of it. So let's move quickly through our final 2. So we talked about digital learning to this point, but what about the rest of the learning experience? Because the most commonly requested type of training on the front line is hands-on training, working alongside a trusted peer or manager to learn how to do the job. The question becomes, where does technology fit in this? Because frankly, this is not where learning happens, right? You learn how to run a roller coaster by running a roller coaster. You learn how to sell shoes by selling shoes. If you want people to be excited about the value they can bring to your organization, you can't bury them in a break room for 2 days of nonstop click next to continue e-learning, because frankly, people will just walk out of that experience. So how do we leverage technology to improve the hands-on training experience? Critical part of the conversation. So first, if you take, just onboarding as an example, do you have the ability to put hands-on job training tasks alongside your digital content so people can connect the dots between what they're doing in real life with their peer trainer or manager, and then what they're doing online and how that information sets them up for that training? Assessment's another huge part of frontline training. So do you have the right technology to consistently assess people's ability to do the thing in real life, not just take a knowledge test and assume they're done or they completed the curricula, but actually go out and watch people drive a lift truck, right? Or check out a customer at the cash register. We need to be able to use technology to make sure we're assessing people consistently so that we know they're ready to do the job. You can take assessment a step further by using technology to capture behavior observations. Managers, again, playing a critical role. They're out there every day watching people do the job and provide coaching, but often that data just kind of goes away because they wrote it down on a slip of paper or it's in their heads in terms of what people are doing right or wrong on the job. But if we use technology to capture that data, we can use it to adjust training to focus on the right things. And then similarly, we can use data from our learning platforms to nudge managers to have the right conversations at the right time. Because again, managers are dealing with so much information. How do they know who needs support right now? And I believe L&D has critical data that we can use. We just have to be able to nudge the manager in the right direction. So overall, I believe right fit tech can help us balance real world training with the digital side of learning because of how critical it is, especially in the front line. And a really quick example from a retailer of how they're blending the digital and real life experience as part of their onboarding programs. So you can see here how they've broken the onboarding experience down by shift and then by a series of days, because we know how critical the first 30 days are to a new hire, especially on the front line. And what I think is particularly meaningful in this kind of path for learning is the fact that they actually limit the amount of training that can happen in the first and second shift, because they know it's more critical for the work experience to focus on the relationship building side of things instead of cramming information into people that they know people aren't going to retain. So they actually apply this experience across their global frontline workforce to create a more consistent onboarding experience, limit the workload on managers, and make sure learning actually matches how people learn on the job instead of, again, trying to overload people with information. So we'll jump to our final one because we're about to run out of time. We got to get to our raffle because you stayed here the whole time for that experience. So let's wrap up by talking about what happens after training. Because how do we, get people to retain what they learned? How do we get people to use what they've learned on the job? So going back to that DC experience from the beginning, people are focused on safety and efficiency. How do we get them to come back to learn additional topics to make learning part of the everyday work experience? So a couple key capabilities I believe you need is first, we need to make sure that we can, again, add value to the digital experience by maybe leveraging learning platforms for more communication capability in addition to structured training. We often look at frontline managers and ask, well, how can we make learning engagement part of managers' KPIs? So it's not just the right thing for managers to do to promote learning and development. It's actually something managers are measured based on to drive that engagement. We talk a lot about gamification. One of my favorite gamification tactics we have in Axonify is called Tell a Friend, where if someone is not regularly logging in for learning, we actually nudge their peer group to go ask them, hey, have you logged into the LMS lately to complete training activities? And the peer group actually gets rewarded for bringing people back into engagement. So instead of it's something that your manager chase you down to do, make it more of a social experience. And then there's the side of gamification that's around rewards, giving people tangible recognition, not just for learning, but for making the effort to come back and focus on their own development. But the key thing about gamification is that to do it right, you need to recognize that not everyone's going to care about points or leaderboards. So it's about using the right tactics that make sense in your environment and giving people a choice of how they engage. And it's something we've seen an organization we work with in supply chain be incredibly successful with, not just engaging people in continuous activity, but also driving meaningful business outcomes, improving first call resolution, dispatch rates, because people are constantly coming back to learn. So that, very quickly at the end there, is my story today. That's the checklist. So if you're going to screenshot anything from today's presentation, please screenshot this slide, because these are the capabilities that I quickly went through today that I believe you need from a digital perspective to enable a frontline workforce and overcome those common challenges we often face with reaching people. Because it's that experience that drives us beyond place and time learning to create a continuous experience where people get the coaching, the reinforcement, the motivation to ultimately achieve the goals we're trying to reach as a learning organization. So with that said, I'll go back to the checklist slide because someone right now is thinking I didn't screenshot that fast enough. We will be sharing presentation materials with you as well, but feel free to grab this as we head over back to Claude for raffle time. Thank you again so much for hanging out with us today. Hopefully this was helpful as you progress your digital journey on your frontline.
Thank you, JD. We'll turn it to our producer, Shay, to do our raffle winner, and we'll see if we can get a couple quick words in before the end. Go ahead, Shay.
Great. Thank you, JD and Claude. So before we wrap up today's webinar, I would like to announce the lucky winner of our raffle. So congrats to Cesar Esqueda on winning today's prize, a $100 Amazon gift card. We will be sending you an e-card shortly to celebrate your win. Thank you.
So JD, maybe we can fit in one real quick question. I think it's it'll be pretty straightforward if I can find it here.
Sure.
And I think you touched on this, but just to clarify for people, does your program, I think she meant actually technology, does your technology allow learners to pull the training when they need it to support learning in the flow of work?
Yes. So I think it's critical to balance and have technology in place that can balance the push and pull. I think sometimes we over-rotate to pull without recognizing the fact that, like I said, if you have 3 to 5 minutes available in your day, how much time are you going to spend browsing for information related to what you're curious about? We still need to give people the chance, whether that's looking for course material that's going to help you advance your skills, or it's looking for information that's going to answer a question right now. So I think it's understanding the dynamics of how people are going to use learning and support related information and using technology to balance what's presented to me because it's the right thing for me to focus on, for me or for the company. And then what do I search for because I need to solve a different type of problem myself?
Great. We're right at the top of the hour. We got a lot of great comments, JD, on your presentation. So thank you to you and to Axonify. We've got a couple of questions that we didn't get to that we'll pass along to JD and see if we can answer them offline for you. So I want to thank everybody for attending, taking time out of your day. Some of you were doing it through lunch, right before lunch. Now's a good time to take a break. We thank you for participating, and especially thank you to JD and Exonify for sponsoring today's webinar. It's been a great presentation. We look forward to seeing some of you on future Brandon Hall Group webinars. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.